Okay, calm down. You got limits, man. You got limits, man. Okay, calm down.
Hello and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We are so excited to be here with you tonight. We have a really fantastic show for you tonight. Sorry about that. We have a really great show for you tonight. And if you heard me just now speaking very speedily, it was because I'm that excited. So really excited for reals. And we have a great show. We have two different segments. We're going to be talking about South Africa, but we're also going to be talking about the Middle East. And before we get started with the show, please do give this a thumbs up. Also, I want to thank everyone for subscribing. We passed the 300,000 subscribers mark, which is so incredibly exciting and thrilling. And we couldn't do that without your support. Also, please do become Patreon supporters if you're not already Patreon supporters at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And that helps this show happen. We literally could not do the show without your support. And if you pay at the $5 a month level, then you get extended and bonus interviews. So what is not to love about doing that? And during the second half of the show, we're going to be talking to journalist Richard Medhurst, who, as many of you know, is going to be tried. Basically, they're trying to criminalize journalism. He's already been arrested. He was arrested in London. He had his house raided in Austria. So we're really excited to be catching up with him so we can talk not just about world events, which he covers, but also what's happening to him and in this latest crackdown on free speech and journalism. But for the first half of the show, we are so excited because I've been wanting to talk about this subject for quite a long time. It's something that I think there's not a lot of information about, and that is the issue of South Africa. And of course, people know that our president likes to talk about the alleged white genocide that's allegedly happening in South Africa. And there's so much misinformation on this. So I wanted to make sure to set people straight about what really is happening and what really has happened throughout history in South Africa. And to do that, we are joined by two excellent guests, both of whom are actually making their debuts on the Katie Halper Show. So Sean Jacobs is Professor of International Affairs and Director of the Julian J. Studley Graduate Programs in International Affairs at the New School. He's the founder of Africa is a Country, a site of criticism, analysis, and new writing. And Tony Karon was born and raised in South Africa, where he was an activist in the anti-apartheid liberation movements, and he is editorial lead at AJ Plus and worked at Time magazine for 15 years before that. So welcome, Tony and Sean. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having us.
Of course. So I have so many questions to ask you guys about. We're going to be talking about South Africa and its relationship to BRICS, its relationship to Palestine, the historic ICJ case that it brought against Israel. But the recent hook, the thing that has South Africa in the news, obviously, is the plight, the genocide that is going on. That, thank God, people are finally speaking out about it. I mean, Donald Trump won't call what's happening in Gaza genocide, but he has the courage to call a much more severe genocide, and that is the alleged white genocide happening in South Africa. And we're going to watch and react to some clips, but what do people need to know about the history of South Africa that explains this kind of like grievance culture that we're seeing that is being tapped into right now?
I mean, I don't know if I could start quickly. And I know the way with Tony is if I say something, I leave something out, Tony jumps in if I do the same. Anyway, perfect. I mean, I think it has, where this comes from, firstly, there's some of it relates to apartheid. So the idea that there'll be a genocide against whites, this was not just present in South Africa, it's definitely part of sort of settler colonial countries in Southern Africa. So in Rhodesia, this was part of the story, that the construction of sort of the white community is based on like fear of the blacks. So fear of mixing, fear of being politically dominated, and then eventually it's, fear of being violently like murdered or as they say on the internet, unalived. So that was I would say, like under apartheid. I would say since the end of apartheid, there was a general sense in which some elements within the white community, particularly kind of far right elements, weren't ready for the new South Africa, did not align themselves with what was from, and we can go into this later, which I think was a very modest settlement that for the most part kept white privilege intact. I mean, any white South African will tell you the inequalities of apartheid is reproduced. Of course, there is some class movement, there's a multiracial middle class, but to a large extent, poverty is black and wealth is still white. So, but there was a section of the white population that sort of saw this as, the end of apartheid for them was a disaster. And so there was a mobilization from those far right forces to kind of to repurpose that same rhetoric of a genocide. What happened over time, however, is that rhetoric was taken up by what in general could have been considered kind of like centrist white organizations, which had committed themselves to operate legally within the new South Africa. And they were known as like social movements, welfare organizations, which were focused primarily on the state of white well-being. But they were doing it inside this kind of the legal framework of the new South Africa. So these are these organizations like Solidarity, which is the old Afrikaner trade unions, and AfriForum, which is another organization that the one that became really famous. Anybody now who knows about South Africa and knows about white genocide knows about AfriForum. So here I will say two things happened. I would say they had been campaigning, and there's an internal story which is sort of inside of baseball, which I don't want to get too much into. But what they did was when Trump got elected for the first time in 2016, and the Republicans, or a version of the Republicans, had the state, they started coming to the US, to DC, and they had access to the White House. They could lobby Trump around this notion that there is this, they're going to be murdered in South Africa. They will be exterminated somehow. And they had the heir of John Bolton. They met with many Congress people. So, Trump got defeated. And so when the second term of Trump arrived, it was almost perfect. And so what happened was it became state policy in the United States. And the problem with the whole, I think the key part here is what was just something that was around on the fringe and on the internet became state policy. And the last part of this is because South Africa represents this, it's almost like a nightmare scenario for white nationalists, for the right, which is on a range of things. This is what happens if you are going to get dominated by black people. You're going to end up like South Africa. And more broadly, this is what happens if you implement DEI policies. If you implement woke policies, South Africa is what you're going to become. So organizing around that, and then you get this sort of absurd thing in which you start bringing across these 59 people.
I mean, that last thing that you said, I think, is the key. This whole narrative is not grounded in South Africa at all in terms of what happened at the White House. This is Trump's domestic politics. It's a fable, this white genocide. I mean, most Afrikaans people in South Africa are laughing at the 59 Afrikaners, some of whom aren't Afrikaners. Because, by the way, what is an Afrikaner? And what is this? And what is whiteness? Because it's an ideology, and I think that's the meeting point. What Sean's saying is absolutely correct. Like, this for Trump is like, okay, I need a scare story to for my base, for the MAGA white nationalist base. DEI is the road to white genocide. Okay, the fact that there's no white genocide, just details. The fact that you're showing pictures of things in the Congo, details. It's all rubbish, as we say in South Africa. But it serves a political purpose. Now in South Africa also, whiteness is an ideology and privilege and power. And as Sean is saying, like, the inequalities are still, apartheid inequalities are actually worse now than they were, despite the black faces in high places. If one's going to be cynical, it doesn't have to be put that cynically. The black middle class, the politically connected, wealthy black I wouldn't call it an oligarchy, but it kind of has some elements of it because it relies on political connections. But in the main, South Africa looks a hell of a lot like it looked when I was growing up in Cape Town.
And what can you tell us about Elon Musk's kind of relationship to this issue?
Elon Musk, for me, Elon Musk plays two roles. One is he amplified these this kind of fanciful claims because of X, which has this outsized influence on political discourse. I mean, even though for some people X might be discredited, but it has the ability to amplify these claims. On the second part for me is it turns out that for Elon Musk, it was also kind of a way in which he's using the Afrikaners as useful idiots, because even he himself, it has emerged, uses the state, the US state, so that his businesses can get contracts, can get business. And the story was a story in, I forget, the ProPublica ran a story last week that basically showed how they were strong-arming the State Department, using these various embassies and consulates. And in this case, it was a story about Africa and African countries. They were using U.S. State Department officials, foreign emissaries. It was their job to strong-arm governments to give business to Elon Musk. So specific to South Africa, it turns out what Elon Musk did was he wanted to get Starlink into South Africa. He was told you have to abide by South African law, which is you have to, in whatever agreement you sign with the country, well, firstly, you have to register, and register means you have to put into the proposal or contract that you will promote some kind of equity, employment equity, or equity stake for South African businesses that are, of which those partners are Black. And he refused to do that. And so on the back of that came this whole barrage of there's a genocide in South Africa. So there's cynicism that is embedded in the politics that Elon Musk's contribution to this.
I think the second element, though, well, I think they overlap. Like if we do criminology on the Trump administration, you can see it's a coalition. And so Musk represents one thing, which is a sort of, I don't know what you would call it, but this kind of libertarian tech bro, like we're going to Mars and bleep, the rest of you and whatever. And, all of that kind of tech bro California weirdness.
Pseudo-libertarian, right? Because he actually...
Pseudo-libertarian, yeah. But really, because actually he's begging for handout. He's almost like
exactly. Corporate welfare recipient, yeah.
Yeah, like the equivalent of military Keynesianism under Reagan. But you're proclaiming libertarian, whatever. And then, there's the white nationalist Steve Bannon, etc., who are like, wait a minute, you're going to actually hurt your own base if you do all these tax cuts and spending cuts, etc. And, he's going to target Musk, as, Musk must go, basically. And I'm not an expert in all this, but there is a Zionist faction. There is the sort of Ben Shapiro MAGA, like, that basically
Joel Pollack
being a key one, the Breitbart guy.
Breitbart.
And he was lobbying to be this Trump's ambassador to South Africa. And he lost that. But he talks to South Africa as if he is speaking for Trump. And he's like, here are the 10 things you have to do to reset relations. And it's all about Israel's concerns. It's all about the ICJ thing. It's all about Hamas. It's all about Iran. It's like, and I guess Marco Rubio in some ways is probably a bit aligned with that. But if you look at the way that thing played out in the Oval Office, it was kind of interesting that when he even gets, I don't know if it was Breitbart, but when he gets asked a question about the ICJ, Trump brushes it aside. He's like, I don't know. He's asked, what will you do? What do you want South Africa to do about its ICJ case? And he's like, no, nothing. We'll let the case take its course. And he basically bats it aside. Like, whereas, in that whole Zionist MAGA world, this is like, oh my God, this is the reason you're amplifying the South African genocide story is because of Israel. And suddenly Trump, I don't know if he was annoyed with Netanyahu or if he's annoyed with the MAGA Zionists attacking him over the Qatari airplane. But he's definitely, it was quite unusual, I think, to see him pivot on that to some extent.
Yeah, although I do think it's more
just quickly,
performative than anything else. I do think it's a rhetorical sleight of hand, right? Yeah, I'm sure we'll agree on that. Yeah.
I don't think he's turned on, I think his plans for Gaza are as horrific as anybody else.
Exactly, right.
But I think, Tony, you've made this point elsewhere that perhaps at this point, maybe the MAGA Republicans who want to talk about the fear of kind of a black planet, that they have like the upper hand of some sort, or they have his ear rather than the sort of Zionist wing, if you want. I mean, there's various kind of people who sort of trying to get his ear. I just want to say about Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio, it seems he appeared before Senate Foreign Affairs Committee the day before. He was so out of his depth. He really doesn't know South Africa. I mean, in a sense, you feel for him, this is another faction. He's still fighting an old Cold War politics about South Africa that seems nobody really cares about. But Tony is right. It was very interesting that despite the fact that before the president of South Africa left to go to DC, all the talk was this was going to be about the ICJ, because the executive order, when it first appeared in January, Trump said, there's a genocide in South Africa, and it said explicitly, it's because you are making, partly I also have a problem with you that you're making a case against Israel at the ICJ. And then secondly, there have been all this talk that the US is upset with South Africa, that it's moving away from US influence towards BRICS, which, in BRICS in the United States means Russia, China. I mean, it's much bigger than that. It's something else. And so everybody assumed that was what it was going to be about. And when the president got to Washington, it's all about racism. Again, it's a cover for something else, perhaps, but that was what it played out in front of the cameras.
Yeah, I mean, it would kind of give away the game, right? If he actually said, "This is like we're avenging. This is revenge for what you did with the ICJ." I mean, right? Like he wasn't going to say that. And here's, by the way, this is just such a Trumpian title. President Trump's executive order on addressing egregious actions of the Republic of South Africa, which is hilarious. And it says, consistent with President Trump's executive order on addressing egregious actions of the Republic of South Africa, the U.S. Department of State is coordinating with the Department of Homeland Security and implementing partners to consider eligibility for U.S. refugee settlement for disfavored ethnic minority Afrikaners in South Africa who are victims of unjust racial discrimination. So there you have it. This egregious racism.
By the way, the interesting thing about this, and I always I'd sort of encouraged Afrikaans journalist friends of mine to do the deep dive, present yourself, and do an undercover piece on this, because how do you define an Afrikaner? This goes back to at the very beginning of apartheid. Like you always had white minority rule in South Africa under the British, right? Settler colonial. They had different words for it, etc. But basically, it was a similar system, more or less. But basically, when it becomes formalized as apartheid, and you have all this racial legislation, you have to create a system of weights and measures to define race. That is not easy. How do you define an Afrikaner? They speak a black language, by the way. Sean and I will agree on this. Afrikaans is originally the form of Patois Dutch spoken by the enslaved Javanese who were brought to Cape Town.
Right.
That's where the language originates. Like there are Malay words for all sorts of things in Afrikaans. The history is well documented, but the pencil test, etc. You can't. I mean, these things are ill-defined. Most Afrikaans families have a brown component. Like the Communist Party in South Africa did this hilarious thing in 1948, just after the regime, apartheid party, National Party, won the election. Malan, who was their prime minister, called for a family reunion of all the Malans. So the Communist Party got all the brown ones to go and stand at the gate and wave.
Wow.
As in, your whole, whole whiteness thing is fantasy.
when you read the executive order, and then on the basis of that, they bring these 59 people. And then I don't know how much people in the US or people who listen to your program paid attention to who these people are. So one of them, I mean, I'll just like quickly tell you about a few of them. One of them, he was asked, he gave a long interview to the New York Times. And so then people in South Africa saw it, including his stepdaughter, who goes on TikTok and says, oh, actually, he's not even an Afrikaner. He's English speaking. Secondly, he's not a farmer. He's an IT tech specialist.
That's hilarious.
He talks about violence. It's actually domestic violence. It was domestic violence, family violence. There's this violence that he talks about. And also what I thought was interesting about her was she obviously went to school, went to college with young Black people. And obviously was like, this is ridiculous. What is my stepfather doing on television? A second one, he said, oh, I fled South Africa from my 5-bedroom house. I mean, what kind of refugee is that? The third one's another one put her house up a listing. She put up a listing and described this house in a country that she was fleeing from as a sanctuary. And another one, a newspaper caught up with her. She said, oh, it turns out, that she had planned always to reunite with her husband, who was living and working in the US. And this was an opportunity to get
free flight.
I mean, yeah.
Wow.
So to Tony's point, it's like the US says that it did all this checking and vetting them and interviewing them. They wanted to make sure that this is the people that they're claiming that there's. I mean, it's completely ridiculous, that the whole thing.
Well, let's take a look at this video of Trump and Ramaphosa meeting, and then we can break down this interaction. And then, of course, we're going to show the video that Trump displayed to document the genocide.
What would it take for you to be convinced that there's no white genocide in South Africa?
Well, I can answer that for President. It's for him. No, seriously.
I'd rather have him answer.
Yeah, I'd rather answer that. It will be,
Our president will respond to you.
Yeah, let me,
Thank you, Mr. President.
it will take President Trump listening to the voices of South Africans, some of whom are his good friends, like those who are here. When we have talks between us around a quiet table, it will take President Trump to listen to them. I'm not going to be repeating what I've been saying. I would say if there was Afrikaner farmer genocide, I can bet you these three gentlemen would not be here, including my Minister of Agriculture. He would not be with me. So it'll take him, President Trump, listening to their stories, to their perspective. That is the answer to your question.
But, Mr. President, I must say that we have, wait. We have thousands of stories talking about it. Sure. And we have documentaries, we have news stories. And that, is Natalie here, somebody here to turn that? I could show you a couple of things, and it has to be responded to.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see the articles, please, if you would. And turn the lights down. Turn the lights down and just put this on. It's right behind you.
We have documentaries on YouTube.
There's nothing this parliament can do. With or without you, people are going to occupy land. We require no permission.
Okay,
from you,
and so
from
that's the
president.
video. So now let's actually turn to this video. Let's show part of this video. Unless you have anything you want to say in response to that before we watch the video.
I mean, just a little note, because I think it is kind of unfortunate, but, Ramaphosa is playing the game there, and the game is whiteness.
Yeah.
So he has to bring 4 very powerful, rich white men to kosher.
That's why I invited you on tonight, Tony. I wanted to make sure we had a white guest to talk about this. Yeah.
I was a waste of a white skin at high school. That's what they called me. So,
I mean, just another quick thing. It is Trump's. So I think the context is important, because obviously people are judging Ramaphosa in a particular kind of way. It's Trump's turf.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
The way Trump operates is not like the sort of the kind of theater of how for these kind of meetings in the Oval Office, we all, sit nicely, you exchange pleasantries, nobody says something crazy. But we knew that, okay, you did this to Zelensky. There was already something that Ramaphosa was, to Tony's point, is Ramaphosa is stepping into a place that he has no control over. He probably, for me, made a strategic error in bringing along the white men. I understand why he did it,
right?
Because what he was hoping they would do was say, there's no genocide. Because I don't know if people have seen those other clips, they then go off and kind of confuse things. One of them praises the U.S.'s support for whites during during the Cold War in Angola. Like, basically, apartheid army was fighting away in Angola, and this guy's like, "Thank you for your help." The other one talks about, I went to Charlie Rose's set. I'm like, what? That guy, Charlie Rose? Okay. And then he also says to J.D. Vance, and I got a copy of your book for my wife. So it's like, they were told to, I don't know if he told them, but they were supposed to confirm that there's no white genocide. Nobody's taking your farms, but they played this sort of other game. It was embarrassing which is this other problem of South Africa, which is that you always, in situations like this, since the end of apartheid, it's kind of the centering of the white anxiety, how whites have to feel. They must be, so they have to keep their privileges, and if we don't, then they're going to leave. So that was that's sort of Ramaphosa. He's playing a game there, but for that part, he didn't. I know.
Work. Couldn't he prep? I mean, didn't he prep them to say, like, okay, so guys, don't come out as like pro-apartheid. Just say that there's no white genocide. Like,
they're not his people.
Right.
Okay. I mean, that's what you're seeing there is what the new South Africa is. It's like, we didn't win. Like, there's a popular misconception that Mandela was taking the regime's surrender in 1990 and, the negotiations of this. Like, no, it was a draw, and it ushered in a new set of possibilities and a democracy that could actually pursue liberation goals, etc. And it's a mixed results, but it's not like this was a decisive victory and then Mandela gave it all back. Like, that's a popular misconception.
And also Ramaphosa kept doing this thing of kind of trying to say, oh, like Mandela taught us. So that's like another device, which is you play up this reconciliatory thing again. For its time, what Mandela did when he came to power to keep the place together, because people forget.
Yeah, it's a civil war.
Most white men, well, probably without exception, were conscripted.
No exceptions.
So therefore, they knew how to handle guns.
They were what? Most white men were what?
Conscripted.
Conscripted. Yeah.
Some of us resisted to handle guns.
In the lead up to that election, I mean, it's important to say this context. There had been a insurrection led by a former general and the leaders of homelands to disrupt the election. This is literally on months before the election. So context, it was good that Mandela did what he did at the time. But now, 30 years later, when you've basically ensured the privileges of white, I don't know if you still have to say, oh, like Mandela told us, we must do this. And one other quick point, because the ANC now literally runs a coalition government in which it barely has a majority, it has to, again, to Tony's point, it has to bring all these right-wing reactionary people along with it for this weird consensus politics. So you have the spectacle when he says, oh, yes, my Minister of Agriculture, like the white minister who spoke up, that guy says, oh, Mr. Trump, it's our job to keep out the rabble and those people. And he's talking about Black South African political parties, which includes the guy whose video they were playing, whose voice they were playing over the video. So there's just, yes, Ramaphosa handled it well, but there was also something about not just what he stepped into with the Americans, but also who he was bringing with him.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that does seem like he a little bit of an unforced error. But let's take a look at the video that Trump then played for people. And Brad, we have this time coded also. So
Nothing you can do. There's nothing this parliament can do. With or without you, people are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care. We can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not? We are going to occupy land.
Yes.
South Africa, occupy land. That's who we are.
Honorable
Do whatever
member,
you want to
Deputy
do.
Speaker,
You can
Deputy
withdraw my
Speaker,
membership
Deputy
from this
Speaker.
useless parliament.
This whiteness. We are cutting the throat of whiteness.
Shoot to kill. Yamasa. Kill the Boer, the farmer. Kill the Boer, the farmer. Brr, pa. Pa. Brr, pa. Shoot to kill. Yamasa. Kill the Boer, the farmer. Kill the Boer, the farmer. Brr, pa. Pa. Brr, pa. Pa.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we have not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal call.
Cry babies.
We will expropriate land without compensation, whether they like it or not. If they object, they can seek refuge in America.
Okay, so this is good too, yeah. So here's so this says each cross represents a white farmer who was murdered in the South, and some people still deny that white South Africans Boers are persecuted and say they don't deserve asylum because they are white. I think we've gotten enough, right? Anything else that's important in this video? Okay. So what say ye?
Okay. Sean, can I go first on Malema and Zuma? Like, firstly, the song that Zuma's singing there is.
Oh, and also, sorry, I didn't. Can you just explain to people who Malema and Zuma are?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So starting with the guy in the red with the
beret
and so on. I'm trying to think what the equivalent is. Like, this guy is a scam artist. He inhabits popular themes, but he's corrupt. He has fleeced thousands of poor Black people out of their savings by kind of create fake banks or whatever. Like, the guy is kind of, but he'll inhabit, like, anything he appropriated, is not going to the people. Trust me.
His empowerment.
But also, he's kind of slipped. He's marginal, right? He's a demagogue who's doing his own theatrics. Essentially, he splits with the ANC over access to the feeding trough. Essentially, the ANC is pretty corrupt and has been for a long time, and he wants a bigger share, and that's where he creates his own party. What Jacob Zuma, former president, so he is from the ANC, incredibly corrupt, and he was charged with rape. He got off on a defense that would never have stood in many courts in many countries. And again, a demagogue who is basically, inhabiting a weird combination of populist to the left themes and populist to the right themes, and sort of engaging with Afrikaners and so on. But the song that he's singing is from the 1960s. And the Boer, in my struggle years as well, we sang plenty of songs about the Boers. We called the cops the Boers. The system was the Boers. That it wasn't farmers. It wasn't literally. It was a system of white supremacy that was personified by white policemen who were hitting us, and that was the Boers. So singing a song about how the Boers are going to run because we're going to beat whatever, that was in 1960s and in the 70s, etc. Those are songs from an era of struggle, which, yes, was, there was violence, mostly by the system. those songs, so it's all taken kind of massively out of context, and there's nothing representative about that. I'm sure you've got more to say. I just sort of
no, I can add a couple of quick things. One is it's legally these Afrikaner social movements actually took Julius Malema to court over those songs, and the Equality Court of South Africa, the Supreme Court of Appeal, and our equivalent of the Supreme Court, which is called the Constitutional Court, all ruled in his favor and basically said what Tony said. This is symbolism. This is not a literal interpretation about murdering farmers. And so that's the context of Julius Malema and his song. But then you have to ask, the accusation here is that this is government policy.
Right.
Julius Malema is not a member of the government. Tony's correct. He is a declining, he had a heyday. I mean, he's a complicated figure. I at least want to point this out. He's a very complicated figure in that when he formed his party in 2013, what he sort of professed, and people did follow him. I mean, they weren't all, obviously, whatever he's doing, they were genuinely people who thought, oh, he represents an alternative, because the state, Ramaphosa, by the way, was a director of the mining company in 2012 in August. If people remember this, when the police murdered 34 miners at this mine in the northern part of South Africa called Marikana. So in response to that, this was Julius Malema's public argument. He broke with the ANC, formed this economic freedom fighters who kind of dress up like Chavistas when Chavez was still around. So, and as Tony's right, very radical, like proposals around the economy, around around public goods, but it doesn't line up with how they act in real life. They did have a moment where they actually took on Zuma in the parliament by insisting that Zuma must pay up the money that he had fleeced from the state. So that's the guy. So, but he's not in government. His party has been declining. And he actually said this week, after the meeting happened, Ramaphosa came back to South Africa, Malema said, I am going to use this thing now to get some popularity, back. But I want to say one other quick thing. I was talking to a friend about this week. So, okay, he has the right to sing this. He won the case. There's freedom of speech in South Africa. It's protected by the Constitution. Right. But the question, I think politically, there has to be a question which you ask, like, do you still, why do you need to sing this? Like, what's the point of singing this? We know it's symbolism, but there's no need to sing this if you're trying to build another kind of society, and in which you do not want right-wing forces and entitled whites to constantly say, look, they're singing Kill the Boer, and then it gets picked up by Zuma, and by Trump, and unfortunately, it damages the country because it has real effects. So I do think that's a separate debate, but the point is, it's not part of government. This thing is protected by the Constitution. And so that's what made it ridiculous why Trump brought this up to see sort of decontextualized video and showing it in the White House.
But Sean, I think one thing that people need to understand is what Malema is doing is pointing to a very, very real grievance, which is basically all of the land in South Africa is stolen property, really. The right. Farmland, if you go back into history, it's the colonizers' willingness to use violence to take the collectively farmed property of indigenous people and call it their own, their property, their farms. And there's been precious little redistribution because of the kind of deal that was made. And I think you see this in a lot of former, decolonized countries where property is respected. Property rights are enshrined in law by decolonizing parties, which means effectively you are legitimizing the gains that settler colonialism made at the expense of the people. If you don't have an answer to that, and the government in South Africa doesn't have an answer to that, the land hunger, the poverty, that Malema comes along and it's like, we will appropriate, we will seize, we will. You can see how that resonates. The issue resonates, Malema doesn't. But the issue of land and redistributing it and, redressing the very painful economic legacies of settler colonial apartheid is very real and very much unresolved.
Right. You actually have a tweet that refers to this particularly, Tony. I'm just going to show that. Okay, here we go. Let's do a screen share. So you write, Trump's falsehoods about white farmers losing their quote unquote property reminded me to mention how South Africa's land became their property in the first place. The answer, the same way that black bodies became the property of white slavers, i.e. through violence. So can you expand on this and also explain to people, I mean, what is the policy vis-a-vis land ownership? Are white people being targeted? I mean, what is this? What is the basis of these claims, or the non-basis of these claims?
I mean, the history, is basically, I think, the 72% of arable farmland in South Africa is owned by white people who constitute no more than 7% of the population. So, that's the history. And they came to own that by the settler colonial conquest, in which the indigenous people pushed into smaller and smaller and smaller plots of land. Interestingly, where this differs from Israel, actually, is that the settler colonial forces push the indigenous people off their land. In Israel, it's like to get rid of them completely. In South Africa, it's to proletarianize them. It's to basically take a cashless economy and charge cash taxes. Basically, you push black people off their means of subsistence on the land to force them to come and work for white people on mines and farms. So that's a profound difference, for a different show.
Sure.
Because the consequences of that are huge. Like, the regime could never bomb Soweto without shutting down Johannesburg.
Right.
But
just to add to what Tony's saying. So post-apartheid, the way to your question, like, how does land reform work? Well, the Constitution basically protects the right to private property. So if you want to bring land reform, there is a policy called willing buyer, willing seller. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Secondly, there is some expropriation. So the thing that Trump was going on about, and which they kind of made into a spectacle, or they played it up, is that the government updated an old law to allow for some form of expropriation. And the kind of expropriation, and they've explained this over and over again, it's very limited. It's nothing. It's like, hey, we need to build a road through here or something like that. The kind of expropriation you have in New York City or Connecticut or wherever. So there's nothing egregious about this expropriation, which the sad part is, again, they're not doing this kind of land reform, de-racializing the cities. I mean, one of the small things is everybody talks like we're only talking about farmland. The other part of this is what's known as the Group Areas Act, in which people's homes were expropriated in the cities, and the cities were made white, and people were moved out to, like, sort of the edges of the cities. So that's part of that should also be part of the debate. But yeah, the way it works is, like, there's been very little expropriation. You have to make a land claim. Personal story: my father is from a beautiful part of the city where there's a National Botanical Garden. They were descendants of slaves. They lived on this land. They were forcefully removed. They made he didn't, because they could probably, but he was a squatter, and his family. The people who made a claim in 1995, they only now finally this year heard that they're going to go back and somebody's going to build houses for them. So if you left in 1969 and you were, I don't know, 50 years old already, or 60, by the time the claim was made, or now by the time you have the right or the potential to go live there, you're already dead. So that's what that's the kind of thing that Malema sort of tries to exploit when he does this kind of singing.
Right. Well, let's see. Let's move on a little bit. You Tony, just compared the treatment of Palestinians to the treatment of non-white South Africans. What are the lessons that we can take from Palestine? What are the lessons we can take from South Africa that can be applied to Palestine? And what are the kind of, like, the limits of those takeaways? Because obviously there's no, like, Boer equivalent of AIPAC, right? There's no, like, there was no, like, Holocaust equivalent that can be weaponized.
Well, actually, people don't know Boer history very well. The Boers were the first people in concentration camps, but that's not. That is very powerful.
Except that
the term concentration camp was invented by the British during the Boer War, and they were locking up the Boer women and children where the men were out in guerrilla operations. So I mean, so internally that worked. That wasn't sort of,
internationally
a global cause for that. Right. But yeah, I mean, the Boers suffered at the hands of the British, no question. But I think, okay, when we're talking about Israel, I mean, I think a lot of us know morally, you can totally see the connection. The basic settler colonial racism, violent racism that is about claiming land and shutting people out of their own patrimony, etc. Like, absolutely. And morally, the moral equivalent is not hard to see. And I think one of the limits are basically precisely that South Africa was always a single society. So Black people were pushed off the land on which they subsisted in order to force them to work in white cities and on white farms, meaning you could never bomb Soweto, you could never bomb Langa or Guguletu. When you have Black South Africans year after year going to Palestine and going, oh my God, this is so much worse than what we knew, that's correct, because basically the Black people who were the victims of apartheid were nonetheless working in the homes, in the factories, in the farms, in the mines, and this was one society. So what had to change was the power relations between people. That's how, it was easier to imagine bringing that to an end than the more complex situation in Palestine. And I don't say it in the way that nuance gets used as an excuse.
No, you're not. You're not apologizing for Israel.
Nothing. No, I think the most important thing we can learn, I think, is the role of international isolation and pressure on forcing a regime. Israel will not stop the genocide unless it is forced to. And whoever has whatever means they have, if they had a coalition of the willing to impose a no-fly zone, great. I don't think we're going to get that because Israel is the West. Sorry to say. But for everybody else, at least, why is, Russia was kicked out of FIFA 2 years ago, like 2 weeks after the invasion, Russia's gone. How is Israel still playing international football? It's an absolute outrage. And things like that have a psychological impact on a settler colonial society. The psychology of their connection to Europe and the West and their legitimacy in the West is actually really important to them. It hurts them when Lord, like the singer, won't go to Israel. It hurts them more than it should. But so I think international isolation, BDS type pressure is the lesson as to. I don't know, Sean. I'm sure you got other.
I mean, just quick points. The big difference, I think, and one is related to what you just said, which is in the West, the support for South Africa, for white South Africa, as playing this particular kind of role, anti-communism, a bulwark, against forms of like Black government in that part of the world. By the end of the 1980s, there was a mass movement in the United States around sanctions that was tied to a legislative agenda that led to South Africa being sanctioned eventually. And the last part of that was the Western governments, particularly the most powerful ones, Britain and the United States, withdrew its support for South Africa. So that change, that was for me, that was one of the decisive parts of like why apartheid. If you're looking for sort of like signs or like where are there possibilities, I also think the other part for me is, and I don't know if Tony, I think Tony might disagree with you about this. I think it's also the anti-apartheid movement of South Africa did a number of things, but one of the things was its ability to be sort of nimble, to adjust. It wasn't like very. I'm not saying that the struggle of Palestinians is rigid or not. I mean, they are facing many obstacles. Occupation, Israel exploits their differences. Eliminate, political leadership. Like there's many things that Palestinians have to deal with. There's the genocide in Gaza, but the ability of the South African struggle to remain sort of nimble and operate on these many different fronts is something that I think might be useful for for Palestinians to sort of engage with South Africans about that. It's not the same. Tony's correct. You can't do these kind of one-on-one comparisons.
Right. Apples
You
to
can't say, like,
oranges.
this happened in South Africa, so this is going to happen there. But you can find like lessons and inspirations from the kind of tactics and the boycotts that people have applied there.
Right. What can you speak more about this nimbleness that you're referring to?
I mean, what I mean is, like, I'll give you two examples.
Yeah.
If you look at the World Cup in Qatar, I was always fascinated by that. So during that World Cup, the 32 teams that were there, it became very clear that there was a 33rd team, and that was Palestine. And this was not just because normally what happens is it gets isolated. Well, the Arab world, parts of the third world might be supportive of it, but it was across the board. You had fans from England, from like various European countries, because European associations, sports associations, covers for Israel through UEFA or FIBA, the IOC. Their bloc does a good job of covering for Israel. Israel plays in Europe, and so it's always impossible to effect what Tony's talking about, boycotts. But what happened there in Qatar was Palestine was like the 33rd nation. There was the spontaneous support for Palestine, the display of Palestinian flags. And I was hoping that PDS or other Palestinian forms of activism could pick up on that. Similarly, during the Olympics in Paris, you saw these spontaneous actions. I don't know if that was that video that went viral of the game. I think it was Mali against Israel. And this old couple, they were talking football with this young guy, and they started going off. And when they said something like, "What are you saying about Israel?" And he's like,
That
"I'm not
was
talking about
so
that."
funny. Brad
He said,
You can find that
free
video.
Palestine, and that went viral. So I don't know how you captured that, but for me, I think what the anti-apartheid movement did, and I'll give you an example of what. So by the end of the 1970s, globally, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa made the argument around political self-determination, but it wasn't getting anywhere in terms of sort of popular public opinion. So what it did was it began to focus on, like, a couple of individuals saying, like, okay, in the West, it's about individuals. Well, Nelson Mandela will become the kind of this iconic figure that will organize a struggle around concerts. So it became the boycott around artists, the focusing on Sun City, the drawing on, like in New York City with hip hop artists making "We Don't Play Sun City." So there was something about like how the struggle in South Africa took the kind of a wave that was going on and taking advantage of those moments.
I mean, it's hard to say because people under genocide, you can't expect people to answer political questions about the future, about multiple tactics and strategies on different fronts, etc. But that is what you needed. I mean, what you had in South Africa, a hegemonic national movement with a comprehensive strategy that could answer the strategic political question for every single front of that struggle. It would have answers for what to do on campuses. It would, in the US, as you know, and in the West Bank, it would have answers to how all of the elements of struggle connect to one another. It would have answers for, the sports boycott, etc. And it would have answers about what the future looked like, which is very, very important. Because the national liberation movement has to be able to do two things: empower the people and disempower and weaken and divide the enemy. And to basically show people, and the ANC did this, that basically you have a different future. You don't have to fight. You don't have to contemplate a future of eternal war and, just brutality and misery, that there is a future for you in South Africa. And it actually turned out, there's a much better future for most of the old white ruling bloc than they could ever have imagined. But that you can actually peel people away from the apartheid project. You can negate and neutralize it. So all of those things are going on at once in this national movement, a coherent, strategic, hegemonic national movement. Sadly, the Palestinians don't have that. We know why they don't have that. But I think for a lot of Palestinian friends of mine, I can see that's the absolute priority. Like, Palestinian unity is the absolute priority, because you have to be able to answer those questions collectively, and to divine a strategy that actually is going to accomplish those two things: empowering Palestinians and weakening the Zionist consensus as to what the future between the river and the sea looks like.
Right.
But also beginning to construct the future. So like in 87, 86, the South Africans are already having conferences outside the country around the question of the justice system, the policy. They may not arrive at a definitive answer about it, but like this is how we're going to think about that. We want to have a society in which everybody has a free opinion. This is how we're going to think about how we deal with questions around restitution. I think you can while you're suffering, you can begin to articulate publicly what is the kind of politics you want when this is over.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm going to actually ask you guys a question that's related to this, because a refrain that we hear often is, where's the Palestinian Mandela, right? And I'm going to show actually a recent tweet about this, just so we can kind of respond to it concretely. So, okay, Dylan Esper writes, one of the under-discussed problems with the Israel equals apartheid analogy is, if Israel's an apartheid state, who is the Palestinians' Mandela, the leader who will deliver for them without recriminations against the oppressor group? There isn't one. So what is your response to this tweet?
Well, firstly, sorry, Sean, you want to go first?
I'll say quickly, because I know you have a lot to say about this. I think firstly, it just makes an assumption about Mandela, which is historically inaccurate. Mandela is being reduced now to this like grandfather, sort of defanged figure, but actually Mandela was at the head of the arms struggle in South Africa. People don't want to talk about that. I think
let me just inject one video clip of Mandela, and then we'll throw back to you. But this is actually a clip of Mandela speaking in Gaza in 1999, and you'll see why I'm showing this, because it speaks to what you just brought up. So let's just show that part.
Choose peace rather than confrontation.
So just so it's a little hard to understand, he goes, peace rather than confrontation. Okay.
Choose peace.
Choose peace
rather than confrontation, except in cases where we cannot proceed, where we cannot move forward. Then, if the only alternative is violence, we will use violence.
His comments won him applause from leader Yasser Arafat and the Assembly. Many Palestinians worship Mandela. Posters bearing his image cover walls throughout Gaza. Others say, our dreams will come true through your support. Pupils at the Shati refugee school waited for hours to greet him. When he arrived, they lined up to shake his hand and bewildered him with blessings in Arabic. Inside a cramped classroom, Mandela received more affection. Students greeted him with a song in English. Good morning. We're happy to hear you. The trip to Gaza concludes Mandela's visit to the region, where for the first time he's been trying his hand at Middle East peace diplomacy.
Okay, so that kind of, I thought, was a perfect example of what you were saying. But it seems like there are two sides of this same coin, right? One is that Palestinians haven't tried peaceful resistance, and Mandela only embraced peaceful resistance, right? Those are the two premises of this tweet. So yeah, but back to you, Sean, and then back to you, Tony.
I mean, I'll tell my other quick, and then I'll be quiet. One is the structural conditions to have a Mandela to emerge. That's not allowed. You're like, oh, we need a Mandela, but any Mandela who appears, you cut them down.
Kill them, right?
Exactly.
I can't agree with that.
My last point is, it also puts all this emphasis on the oppressed. Oh, they must bring us a Mandela.
No, but the reason I say I can't accept that is because you are now talking about a Mandela as a magician, or somebody who makes a 180-degree turn. It's like, no, if Mandela had died 5 years before the end, the outcome would have been exactly the same. Mandela was always part of a collective leadership. The ANC's policies deeply ingrained in its institutions and in its practices, because it had so many white comrades actually making supreme sacrifices in every level of the struggle. There was no question about, this thing. I was going to say this earlier, this idea, the white genocide fear. I think it was Cedric Robinson, actually, who notes, this thing has always been there in situations where in the name of whiteness, Black people are colonized or enslaved. And there's always this fear of the terrible retribution, which is just projection. Because if you look at history, the number of times, the scale, yes, of course, white people have been killed here and there, in slave rebellions, et cetera, et cetera. You look at the scale, it's not this. It's a fable. It's basically projection of like they are going to do to us what we've always done to them. And why do you believe that? Why do you think actually that your inhumanity is somehow going to be reflected in the people you've dehumanized? That's So sorry, but so I don't think that there's a question about a Mandela being somebody who says, "Whoa, we were going to kill them all, but now we're going to actually hug them." No, that's always been the culture of the ANC. And I think, as you say, Sean, like the Palestinian movements have never had an option for pursuing justice, because that's what was Mandela's bottom line, without using violence. That's never been on the cards. The Nakba began in 1948, or maybe a few years before, and it's never ended. There's never been an end to the violent displacement of Palestinians for this greater Israel expanding ethnostate by violence. So, that question is, as you say, is based on twin fallacies, one about Mandela and the other about Palestinian history. Palestinian movements have always, entertained, I don't think they've articulated it sufficiently or in an engaging and hegemonic way, but they've always, had formulations about who belongs in a liberated Palestine that haven't been like, basically denying any humanity of the oppressor.
Well, yeah, this sounds like we could continue this debate. I mean, you guys are mostly in agreement, but there's a little bit of disagreement. That's always fun. We always love that. Do you guys want to respond? I mean, this is such a great place to end, but I do feel like I want to just leave people with, like, I still see people in the chat who are saying, no, there are all these laws against white people in South Africa. And here's something, I just want to show a tweet from Elon Musk. South Africa has now passed 142 laws forcing discrimination against anyone who is not Black. Even though I was born in South Africa, the government will not grant Starlink a license to operate simply because I'm not Black. This is a shameful disgrace to the legacy of the great Nelson Mandela, who sought to have all races treated equally in South Africa. So actually, this is a perfect thing to end on, because it brings up the Mandela issue and also the issue of what people like to call reverse racism, which obviously is not a thing, but yeah.
But that's whiteness. That is basically saying any move, and you see this here in America, any move to redress historical racist injustice, it can be cast as, but any move against white privilege, which is not exactly earned, it's created by violence historically, but any move against it can be deemed hostile to whiteness. It is hostile to whiteness. It's not necessarily hostile to white people, but any affirmative action, for example, as we see in the US courts, is deemed to be, oh, this is hostile to white people. So Musk is saying, this neoliberal, because it is a neoliberal solution, which was Black economic empowerment, where they moved from a redistributive model of economic planning to one that was basically going to empower. Black economic empowerment meant the creating of a Black capitalist class by insisting on 30% ownership of any corporation in Black hands. And obviously a lot of that went to politically connected, billionaires, which, Cyril himself actually is one, is an example of that. He's a mine owner. He used to be the Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers, and now he's mine owner in part. So yes, class issues never entirely went away. But what Musk is saying there is like any move that basically challenges white privilege is anti-white. Well, okay, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, my quick word on this is if you can check out something like Africa Check, these are like fact checker websites, including, by the way, actually I'll end on this, including Musk's own Grok, or what is it? I forgot what it's called.
Grok, yeah, Grok, yeah.
Yeah, Grok, actually, I don't know if you remember, Grok had a meltdown when Grok was like, well, my owner is telling me that I should say there's a white genocide and there are race-based laws when there isn't. So even Musk's own Grok told him it's not. Yeah. I mean, it's just part of the bigger fallacy, which, as we said earlier, has nothing to do with South Africans. And it's basically a small group who just can't get used to living in a society in which they are not at the center of the society and their privileges are always being protected.
Right. Well, one last question, because I wanted to ask you guys, people may know I've mentioned this on a couple of shows so far, but I'm going to be speaking at this really cool event. It's called it's the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress. It's in Vienna. And they just sent me a video of someone I don't know a lot about. I know a little bit about him, but I realize he's much more fascinating than I even realized. Ronnie how do I pronounce it?
Ronnie Kasrils.
We had him on our podcast talking about food.
Yeah, we know him.
So can you just give me like a 10-second explanation or 30-second explanation of who this guy is? Because he's really cool, and he just released a video endorsing this Congress.
Jewish South African, under apartheid, was a member of the armed wing of the ANC. In this sort of, Tony can say more about this, but in the kind of initial sort of BDS themed activism in South Africa, he played a leading role in signing public statements because the Jewish community in South Africa is very small, there's a lot of groupthink, and there were a group of people who broke from that and by signing public statements. And Ronnie was always at the head of that. He was a minister in the South African government. He's quite old now. So I don't even know if he'll travel to this Congress. But yeah, fashionable, laudable person. And to Tony's earlier point, Ronnie Kasrils is another example of a South African who had dedicated their life to defeating apartheid, and actually points to that issue of breaking with you're assigned to
rank or privilege,
prolong oppression and actually siding with the oppressed. Ronnie Kasrils was a perfect example of that.
Yeah. Well, let's just watch 1 minute of what he said. And I know who he is. Someone in the comments, I don't know why I read this. I know who he is. I just didn't realize he was quite as fascinating as he is, and had a whole different part of a life that I didn't know about. So let's just play 30 seconds or a minute of this video that he made for this Jewish anti-Zionist Congress. And the segue is that our next guest, of course, is Richard Medhurst, who we're about to bring on. Well, there are a couple segues. One, we're going from the South Africa segment to the Austria-based guest segment, Richard Medhurst. So this is perfect because this is about a Congress in Vienna. Okay, let's just take a quick look.
The original Zionist Congress.
Right, exactly. That's why they're doing it there,
yeah. I say I was greatly inspired when I learned of the upcoming Jewish anti-Zionist Congress in Vienna in June. It's vital that anti-Zionist Jews stand by the Palestinian people. It's vital that anti-Zionist Jews liberate Judaism from Zionism. When the few whites stood up with black people in South Africa against apartheid, it proved to be a qualitative action because it exposed the lies and the mythology of racism, bringing together Jewish anti-Zionists from all over the world in such a Congress is of historic importance.
Great. So very excited to get that endorsement. I'm not sure if he's coming, but he's given it his blessing, his I assume secular blessing. I'm not sure if he's like a fellow traveler like me and you, Tony. But yes, thank you so much, Sean. Thank you so much, Tony. Where can people find your work?
I'm Tony, you go.
No, Tony Karon, one word on Twitter, and I think Instagram as well. It's called Rootless Cosmo on Instagram.
Oh yeah, Rootless Cosmopolitan, right? That's your
Harlan
Substack,
told
right?
us, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you can find me on, I have a Substack, which I try to write one more, called 11 Named People. It's a kind of a play on my Euro Eric Hobsbawm's idea that the best representation of any people is 11 named people on a field. And people don't know, but American football puts 11 people on the field per team. So does football, and so does cricket.
Wow, there you go. I knew that, of course. No, I'm kidding. I know nothing. Well,
Not sure where the numerology takes us, but
yeah, we'll have to do another show on that. But thank you guys so much. I'm so happy and honored that you came on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye, guys. So that was great. And we are going to bring on our next guest, who I think probably needs no introduction. But if you're watching, Brad, how are we doing on likes? He's going to do the calculation. And Brad's going to be in Vienna too, as well as our podcast producer, Andrew. It's going to be me and Brad and Andrew. How are we doing on likes? Good. You're going to tell me the number? I'm going to don't make me throw you on stage, Brad. Do I just bring him on stage against? That's not. We can't do that. We can't. That's not consensual. We can't see you or hear you, Brad. You know what? I'll just open the thing up myself.
I texted you, Katie.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay, next time go like this so I know. Okay, over 900. Great. So keep liking. That's amazing. Thank you. And thanks, Brad, for everything you do. Okay, so we are going to bring on our next guest, and he's been on the show before, and we are so excited to be bringing him back onto the show. Journalist Richard Medhurst, the intrepid, brave journalist who is, because of his work, facing several challenges, including being arrested, being raided, and facing trial and bail. So welcome, Richard.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course, and thank you. And I appreciate that you're on because it's very late where you are. But
That's all right.
thank you so much for joining. And for those who don't know about this, the UK authorities have baselessly and chillingly accused you of terrorism. So, can you describe what happened?
Yeah, and the Austrian ones. And actually, it's funny if I can segue from your mentioning of that anti-Zionist Congress. I gave a speech in Vienna about a year ago, and I gave it a title like something like destroy Zionism like in its birthplace, something like that. And when I read the search warrant from the Austrian agents, because they were not regular police, they were intelligence, and apparently they've had me under surveillance since that speech, and they called it a hate speech, but there's like no explanation of why it's a hate speech. It's just like, as I'll get to in a few, in a bit about the details, like they've thrown like the wildest allegations like imaginable. But yeah. So in the UK,
Richard, they know that it's if you don't equate it's hate speech, because as everyone knows, and I as a Jew love this idea, as Israel live streams a genocide, I love the idea that Jews are a monolith who support Zionism, which is the only way you could possibly frame anti-Zionism as hate speech. And in case anyone doesn't get this, I'm being sarcastic, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I don't know if you've seen that show, The Spy, by Sacha Baron Cohen.
Right, yeah, I've seen an episode.
Yeah. So me and my cousin is Syrian and Palestinian. We kind of like broke it down. This is like a couple of years ago. It's like one of the first videos I did. And like, if you watch the show, it like starts out in the Jewish quarter in Damascus. And it's so funny because they write Jewish ghetto, but like some of the nicest houses in Damascus are literally in that area. So it's like trying to create like some kind of mental, trigger to the Warsaw ghetto when it's got nothing to do with it. Yeah. So, my cousin, my mom, my aunts, my uncles, they're all born and raised in the Jewish quarter in Damascus. And you had, so my mother's side of the family are Syrian Christian, but you have them living with Muslims and with Jews, like all literally side by side in the same neighborhood. And I think Syria's Jews were the last to go to Israel. And they were basically like forced to go there by the Israeli government and the US, and they had them go through the US first. Many of them actually stayed in the US, but like many of them didn't want to go. So I just kind of wanted to say that as to your point that, you know, Jews are not a monolith, and yeah, it's yeah. So
And
sorry to say
one of the
tangent, but yeah.
Not to be tangential again, but one of the great panels that's going to be at this Congress that Haim Bresheeth is going to be participating in. And Haim, by the way, is one of the characters in the documentary that we're working on about Holocaust survivors and their descendants speak out against the genocide. And he wrote an amazing book on the Israeli army. But he's going to be participating in a panel on convivencia, which is, you know, the great Al-Andalus period. When Muslims and Christians and Jews were living together. And it's so important because it debunks this myth that you hear even from some like smart people. I mean, I heard someone who I would otherwise consider smart talk about the quote unquote conflict as a biblical conflict. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? So this lie that you obviously can speak to, and you don't have to address it right now because I keep cutting you off with your fascinating story, but this lie that just Muslims and Jews, they just can't get along. It's a biblical conflict, and which of course erases Christians. That's another thing. But anyway, so back to you, Richard, wherever you want to take it. You can go back to the story about what happened to you. Which is really
I think he was arrested under the Terrorism Act, right?
Yes. Oh, right. Yes, and he's in your timeline. Right. Of course. Right. So yes, he was arrested for saying that Israel was not going to be able to defeat Hamas. He was arrested, and I'm not spilling any beans. He said this to me in an interview. He's 79 years old. He's being treated for cancer and a heart condition, and they threw him in jail and wouldn't even bring him his medication at first. And his crime, again, this guy whose parents, by the way, weighed like 70 pounds, I believe, when their camps were liberated. This is a guy who that was his crime. Anyway, but
no, it's shocking. It's really shocking, and that goes to show you that you know, the law's got nothing to do with like actual crime or you know, fighting so-called terrorism or anti-Semitism. I mean, Tony Greenstein is also Jewish, and he was not just only arrested. I think that they raided him December 2023, and then they charged him, and he's going to court next year. So it's an outrage.
Also part of the Congress. Also.
Okay, good. That's good. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys. Really, it's going to be great. I didn't know so many people were coming. That's wonderful. Yeah. So I mean, and just you mentioned Andalusia. I think that's also another fascinating period because, you know, so during the Reconquista, they took back Andalusia, which was really kind of like this. I mean, when we talk about the Islamic Golden Age, you know, when people say that, they mean like advancements in science and medicine and you know, human anatomy, you name it, mathematics. A lot of this took place in Baghdad and Damascus, but it also took place in Andalusia, and Andalusia stayed like one of the most prosperous regions in Spain, well until, you know, basically the period when it was taken back or invaded by the Reconquista, and you had Jews expelled along with Muslims, and many of them took shelter with the Muslims. So that goes to show you there is no religious or historical or cultural difference between you know, Jews, Muslims, and Christians. I know Syria, we'll talk about that in a bit, and Syria unfortunately today is a giant mess, but the way I knew Syria and you know, I literally saw this with my own eyes and experienced it. It was not like this at all. Like, it was considered rude to even ask someone what their religion is. So that's like the level of harmony that you had between all these different groups, and unfortunately Zionism destroyed that. It's really, really tragic.
Yeah, and they created I mean, they totally destroyed it and pitted people against each other and created. I mean, there's that excellent book about how was it in Iraq, in Baghdad, where they bombed a synagogue to scare the Jews into going to Israel.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. It's mainly in like Iraq and Egypt. In Egypt, it was the Lavon affair. So the Mossad were like infiltrating or exploiting Jews, Egyptian Arab Jews, and kind of using them to do their dirty work. And ironically, their dirty work was like attacking British and American you know, consulates or libraries, or like basically things that are not directly the embassy but are basically considered part of the embassy. And then the whole point of that was to get anti-Jewish sentiment riled up. And you know, they did the same thing in Iraq, where the point was like to make Jews feel unsafe to the point that they leave the country and they go to Israel, right? Because it's advertised as like being the safest place for Jews, and we know that's not even true, right? I mean, it's literally a war zone, right? And in Iraq, they bombed the synagogue, as you mentioned. And it's not just like speculation or something. Like these agents have come out decades later and confirmed what they've done. And it's really disgusting that they would not only attack like other Jews, but like even go into a holy place like a temple or a synagogue and then defile that with like explosives. I mean, it boggles the mind. It really boggles the mind. And it shows you that there's no respect for Jewish life, human life. It's just kind of like political like expediency. Whatever it takes, we're going to do it. And it reminds you a lot of Wahhabism in a way, which is kind of ironic, because the Israeli government, they like put me in some report on online anti-Zionism, and they like accused me of saying the Israeli government works with ISIS when that's literally what they do. But okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or do you want to talk about that after? Should we get into your case, like how they went after you?
Yeah, it's related to that. I think.
Oh right, okay. So yeah, so tell it at your, however you want to begin.
Yeah, and if I can provide another seg, we were just talking about how FIFA and UEFA haven't banned Israel. I published like this massive investigation a month before I was arrested about all these Israeli athletes. Like I went through the whole Olympic team and the football team, and like the not just the national football team, but also, like these clubs, Israeli football clubs. Many of them are based illegally in the West Bank, which goes against FIFA rules. Like, you can't have like an American football club inside of German territory, for example, right? It's the same thing. And I kind of just showed like how they wouldn't just break in the law that way, but all the players had made like all these, like some of them were pro-genocidal comments, others were like just go IDF, and some of them even dated back to like 2014. And my point was just to show that they banned Russia after like 4 days, right? And here you have the Israeli players breaking rules on multiple levels, and nothing happened. And I think that might have been one of the reasons they arrested me. I don't, because they claim it's supporting terrorism or whatever that means. But I think there's multiple investigations or reports that I did that maybe angered them, and I think that might be one of the things. And that Israeli report that they published like a few months ago, I think it was this year. It's the Israeli Foreign Ministry that published it. They named me and like Palestine Action and a bunch of other people, and they had like a bunch of tweets put up, and they focused on the ones where I said that Israel's working with ISIS. And I mean, that's a fact. You see Netanyahu, he invited all these like Syrian fighters who were, they called them moderate rebels, but they weren't. They were part of, these right-wing Salafist jihadist groups that are either funded by Qatar or Saudi Arabia or by America and Britain and France and Germany. And they were giving them medical treatment in IDF hospitals. And he took pictures with them, photographed. So it's not like I made this up or something. Right. They published the photographic evidence themselves. So I think there's a lot of reasons why they got angry with me. I mean, it doesn't warrant any of the behavior of being arrested and raided. But I was just trying to do my job as a journalist, and I think it angered them, whatever it was that I was reporting on.
Richard, one thing, this is a tech issue. I think it's possible that Brad, you want to come on and break it down because you're the expert? Don't worry, we're not arresting you. We're not raiding you. Yeah.
I'm ready for anything. So.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Yeah, no, I don't know if it was just on my end, Richard, but there was just a little intermittent glitching on the audio, and my best guess would be if you checked your StreamYard settings, the cogwheel at the bottom window there.
Yeah.
My best guess would be possibly your microphone was set to your wireless AirPods instead of your wired lav mic.
No, it's only on the wired one. Is it maybe echo cancellation you want me to turn off, or automatically adjust mic volume is off, by the way?
We can try. Yeah, why don't we try turning all of that off?
I actually studied sound engineering in my spare time. So
are you serious?
Oh no!
Yeah,
oh
no.
Dude, Richard, you just signed up for me to blow up your phone and nerd out with you.
I'm not joking, by the way. Like I did this for like a decade. I've got like tons of analog gear in the other room and stuff.
Oh my god!
Get out of my dreams and into my apartment right now. But so yeah, I guess that we can see if that takes care of it. Hopefully that's the case.
Right.
So yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, so should we play? So did something just happen, or do we need something to happen? Sorry.
Sorry, I was jumping between one place and the other. No, we made an adjustment, and so
oh great. Okay.
And so hopefully that'll resolve it. And then I just need less than a minute to queue up what you'd like to show next.
Oh, we don't have, that was actually just to give him time to do it. So we don't have to show it. Okay. I'm glad we had this. I'm glad we had this chat. And also, by the way, thanks, Brad. By the way, you're getting lots of support in the messages. So just want you to know, lots of people thanking you and saying that they're with you and you're on the right side of history. And someone also saying that you woke them up to Israel. So tell us how this unfolded. So you're doing really important journalism. You are saying inconvenient truths about Israel, about ISIS, about Syria. And then how does this unfold for you? To the extent that, and I know there are probably things you can't reveal. So to the extent that you can talk about it, how did this happen to you? Like, how did you experience it? Getting into trouble?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I expected them to arrest me or detain me, for several years. Not because I'd done anything wrong or that I felt guilty. On the contrary, because I precisely had done nothing wrong, and I'd seen them use this against Glenn Greenwald's husband, David Miranda. That was like the first time. I don't know how old I was. I think it was 18, 19. Like I saw that for the first time, and that marked me like as an abuse of the terrorism legislation. And of course, I mean, my father is an expert. He's a professor in counterterrorism, and so I knew from him like how this stuff is abused, because my father teaches it like completely differently to how Western governments apply it, right? And besides, I've been a victim of terrorism myself. Like when we were posted in at the Kashmir mission, so we were based in Islamabad. My school was blown up as a result of the Egyptian embassy being bombed, right? And ironically, that was Zawahiri, who's like Bin Laden's number 2, his mentor, and also the mentor of the guy running Syria now, Jolani, and who's backing this guy? The UK, the US. So I find this kind of ironic because like they almost kill me inadvertently or directly, however you want to take it, and then they like accuse me of terrorism for just sitting in a room and doing journalism. But anyway, I expected them to abuse this legislation against me at some point, and I'd seen them doing it against Craig Murray and Kit Clarenberg and others. And yeah, they really escalated it because they had detained everyone else, and for me they went straight for an arrest. Like I'm the first journalist that's ever been arrested under this provision. And no one's been arrested under it since. Now they've done it to Tony Greenstein, 12-1A. They've done it to Richard Barnard, but like to go after a journalist is especially problematic. Not that it makes the other arrests okay in any shape or form, but just because if you look at the language, it's so broad. It's like any opinion or belief can those are the exact words they use. Opinion or belief can be a criminal offense. Well, you could state a fact, and just because they consider it to be unpleasant or unfavorable, they can twist it to saying that's your opinion. How can you like prove or disprove what someone actually thinks? It makes no sense.
Right.
And then under the same law, it also has like provisions about what other people might understand from you. Like, how am I responsible for what other people understand from my words? Someone might understand this and someone might understand that. So they arrested me and they threw me in like basically a toilet. They wouldn't give me water for the first couple of hours. They didn't even tell me that I could have a lawyer. I'm the one who brought it up. So you because I thought they were schedules, like they were doing a Schedule 7, which is where they detain you, and it turns out it was the Section 12, which was new to me and as I said, unprecedented. And they questioned me like after 20 hours. I sat down the other day and I was looking at the math. They arrested me 6:30 p.m. and they questioned me like 2 p.m. So they waited like I didn't know what the hell they wanted, and I didn't know if I was going to get out until the last minute. There were people from Palestine Action who were in jail at the same like moment as me, who I was tweeting about as I got on the plane, and I was saying like they've been in jail for 100 hours. They haven't been charged. They haven't been bailed out. And a cornerstone of English law is that you either charge someone after 24 hours or you let them go, right? You're innocent until proven guilty. Almost every country has this nowadays. So you see how bad it is, this terrorism act, that they can just, withdraw all your liberties and just keep you in jail and keep extending that. They can do it for 100 hours, for 28 days. So I really had no idea until the last minute that they were going to let me go. And they released me on bail, on unconditional bail. And, I thought that was that. And what they've done is they've extended that bail every 3 months. So that's the maximum they can apply for. The police apply for an extension. And, they've kept me under investigation. And some lawyers have told me that that's probably their strategy is to basically paralyzed me because, as I said, the law is so broad. It's like you can't work anymore. And they've extended that 3 times. And now about, what is it, 2 weeks ago, they finally, instead of dropping the investigation, as they should have, they decided to send it to the Crown Prosecution Service. So basically the CPS in England is like, well, let's just loosely, I'm saying the district attorney, basically, the district attorney's office. Basically, at that point, the police are saying, we think this guy, there's enough dirt on this guy to charge him. Go ahead and charge him. Now, the CPS can say, we agree, and we're going to charge him, or they can bounce it back to the police and say, no, go and get more dirt, which is really weird when you think about it, because if there's not enough evidence to charge someone, why would you insist on finding more evidence to charge them for the sake of charging them? Like, just drop the thing, right?
Right.
So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm
it's almost like they're admitting that it's a targeting.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, they also mention like my following and stuff, which is weird. Like, what does that have to do with the law? Like, the law doesn't make any mention of that. But which shows you it's a bit political. But yeah, that's an escalation now, definitely. So they kept me under investigation for like 9 months, and now they've sent it to CPS. And then while I went back to Vienna, they then raided me in Vienna, and they took it like to the next level. Like, the accusation was no more, it wasn't supporting terrorism anymore. Like, if you read the warrant, it is out of this world. Like, they said that I'm a member of Hamas, and I'm specifically a member of the Qassam brigades. And I tried explaining to them, like, I'm not Muslim, and you have to be Muslim. Not, so even if I wanted to, it's just not possible. They do not allow you to be a member.
Right, you have to convert, right, first?
Yeah.
I mean, at a minimum, yeah.
As a minimum, right? And they're walking in, and there's Christmas trees and everywhere, and like a crucifix, and they know I'm registered as a Catholic in Austria because I had my first communion there. And it's not a secular country; it's a Catholic country. So they have this on paper. They know this, and it didn't make any difference. And then they said, like, because I'm allegedly a Hamas member, they accused me of like sexual exploitation, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, like using weapons to kill Jews, stealing their property. Like, every crime under the sun is in there. And I'm just reading this, and I'm like, I'm stunned. I'm stunned. Like, that you can, do these mental gymnastics.
It also
it's wild.
It speaks to that like ignorant racism where they just equate all Muslims and like anyone who has any Arab background, right? Like, I always think after 9/11, like the first person who was killed was a Sikh.
I remember that.
It has nothing to do with, but again, it's like there's this amorphous like Muslim/Arab/terrorist classification that everyone is thrown into. Yeah. So
and like I said, my mom's side of the family, like, so my dad's English and my mom's Syrian Christian. Like, Christianity comes from Syria, from Greater Syria, from Palestine. So it's not like, it's not like I find it so weird that like the West wants to monopolize a religion that it didn't even spawn, which makes it even weirder. And like, you can usually, when someone is Arab, you can usually tell from their first name if they're Christian. They'll have like what you consider a Western quote unquote name. So, but like I said, they know all this stuff, and it's just like shocking to me that a grown adult can, a prosecutor can type this out and print out and send like agents to, to raid you. And by the way, they also like threatened to revoke my residency. So also based on my reporting, and that's how they trapped me. They actually lured me to the immigration bureau, right? And I'd never been summoned there in my life, so I knew something was up. And then they basically like really explicitly threatened me, like, we can revoke your residency because of like these videos that you've done. And then I was like, no comment. And then as soon as I thought the meeting was done, they printed out like a copy for me to sign. These agents like walked in and they served me with a warrant. So it's all set up.
Wow. Okay. So that's all extremely scary. Now you actually have a timeline that you put together, right? Because you think that there was coordination between Israel and the UK. You want to show this timeline? We have it. We have your tweet. Let's take a look at it, and you can kind of expand on it. So that's the tweet. Brad, can we zoom in on it? So Richard writes, sorry, go back 1 second. Sorry. Richard writes, a timeline of arrests that I put together. British journalists and activists critical of Israel arrested, raided, or detained under counterterrorism laws. When in the weeks and months surrounding collusion between the British state and Israeli embassy. So let's take a look at these people, and then you can talk us through more about this collusion. Okay, so all right, we have Filton 10 arrested under Terrorism Act. Richard, and feel free to jump in to add anything. How about you read it, and Brad can move it along to follow you.
Yes, so I'll just to preface, this is not my Freedom of Information Act request. It wasn't my FOIA, but someone made a FOIA and obtained an email between the Attorney General's office and the Israeli embassy. Now, just to be clear, why do we care about the Attorney General? Because whenever there's something really heavy, like a terrorism charge, the Attorney General is the one that rubber stamps it, right? They have the final say. So like right now, if I'm charged with terrorism, the Crown Prosecution Service will recommend that I'm charged, and the Attorney General will stamp it. Okay, so that's why it's significant. And that email was completely redacted and blacked out. There's not a word you can read in it, but you can see the subject, and the subject says CPS, so that's Crown Prosecution Service, /SO15, that's the counterterrorism unit, contacts, and it's addressed to the Israeli embassy. And it's sent like 3 weeks after they arrested me, and it's a follow-up to a meeting that they had 2 weeks after they arrested me, okay? And it's not just me, right? Like, if it was just to do with me, you couldn't really, like, you know, guess or have a fair guess about what's going on here. But because of the timeline that you brought up, there are all of these arrests, like this entire crackdown that started to unfold. I think it's really, really shady. So, like, the day before they arrested me, they charged Richard Barnard, who's a co-founder of Palestine Action. They charged him under the Terrorism Act, Section 12(1)(a). That's the same thing that they nicked me under. And then you can see Filton 10. So Filton is just a factory that was sabotaged or you know, basically that these actionists went and sabotaged, but they're still part of Palestine Action, right? And we know for a fact, I can tell you for a fact, that the Israeli embassy and the British government have colluded in the past against Palestine Action. Okay, so that we know about that for sure. So that's why it's like in the shadow of that we're guessing that they were meeting about us. And then you can, if you bring up the timeline, you'll see they arrested me on August 15th, yeah, and then afterwards, I think Sarah Wilkinson was next. She was like done 2 weeks later. Yeah, exactly. And then after Sarah Wilkinson, they did Asa Winstanley. They raided his stuff. Although I think just today they gave him back his devices.
Yes,
so
yeah,
that's good news.
Asa. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can see Haim Bresheeth is there as well.
Yeah.
So he was arrested. I think he might have been charged, although you'll don't quote me on that because I'm not sure. I know Natalie Strecker was definitely charged. They arrested her and then charged her a few months or weeks afterwards. And then you can see these are another 8 Filton actionists. So they're called the Filton 18, these 18 Palestine Action activists. And by the way, the prisons that they've been sent to are absolutely horrific, like Wandsworth, for example. Yeah. And there's Tony Greenstein. So he was raided almost a year before in December 2023, and there they charged him. I mean, just, you know, look at the dates. This is all happening within, you know, like every 2 weeks, basically, there's something else. Someone's being raided, someone's being charged, someone's being arrested. It's so suspect. And, you know, when the Israeli embassy are talking to the Crown Prosecution Service, this is very, very bizarre for several reasons, because, you know, the Crown Prosecution Service is meant to be an independent body, right? Not just independent of foreign governments, but even of the British government. They're supposed to make charging decisions based on, you know, a test of the law and whether it's in the public's interest. And you know, it's purely supposed to be like a holistic institution. So it makes you wonder, why on earth are the Israelis contacting them directly? And why are they contacting the counterterrorism unit? They're not just contacting the police. No, it's specifically that unit, which has arrested me, which has charged and arrested all these people that are on this timeline. It's all under the same law, under the Terrorism Act. So, you know, it's not a smoking gun, that email, but sort of, you know, sort of. The subject says enough. And I'll just add another thing. The Attorney General, Richard Hermer, has family members in the IDF.
Wow.
And yeah, and he took a trip to Israel, because I went through those emails between the embassy and his office, and there's a mention of a trip to Israel. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but, you know, if you put it together with the other pieces of information that I mentioned, it starts to paint a picture that this is perhaps not the most neutral or
Right.
yeah.
Wow. So and what's next for you?
Well, I think this is their end game. Well, I don't know. I mean, like in the best of cases, they want to keep me in limbo like the rest of my life, so I can't work. And in the worst case, they're just going to throw me in prison. And yeah, like I said, these are very like serious potential charges. I mean, that 12(1)(a), I think is 14 years in prison maximum, and that's if it's just one charge. And then if you look at the stuff in Austria, like it could be 10 years or more. I've no idea. Like they're accusing me of things like being a member of organized crime, like I'm Al Capone or something during Prohibition. It's really wild. And I think the aim of that is to throw as much stuff at someone in the hopes that something sticks. Although I don't know how it could work, but it's quite overwhelming. Like they've really put a target on my back. I think perhaps more than anyone else. And it's all because of my work. It's literally nothing else at all. It's purely because of my videos, because of my work, because of things that I've said doing my job as a journalist, nothing else. And that should really scare people.
Yeah, it really should. And, a lot of people, I think, kind of take false comfort in the idea that, oh, well, Richard Medhurst has ideas that I don't agree with, so I shouldn't care. Or therefore, they're not going to go after me. But, that's not really a principled position, first of all. But it's also not how the world works. So if you care about like self-interest, you should care about this. But obviously, the principled stance is to oppose this. But also, that's how these things work, is that people think it won't affect them. And so they don't have to speak out against it. But, I wanted to actually, speaking of your actual journalism, I wanted to talk about some of the areas that you cover. And you focus a lot on Gaza. You also focus on Julian Assange, Israel, Palestine, and Syria. So let's just talk a little bit about, and Iran also, but let's talk a little bit about the latest coming out of Gaza. It is disgusting. I mean, there was talk of a ceasefire. I think that's obviously mostly performative and not going to happen anytime soon, unless we can somehow like start a rumor that Netanyahu insulted Trump's penis size or something. Like I really do think Trump can be moved through like personal grievances and perceived slight. So let's try to spread that rumor. But there's just today, the atrocities are, I mean, they're overwhelming. It's like every time you think it can't get worse, it gets worse. So we're seeing absolute chaos from the Gaza Aid Organization, which is a total sham, and then victim blaming. So let's just take a look at this video. A3, that would be 3. Again, these are people, it's really important to point out, these are people, this is not some natural disaster. Like, this is a policy decision. These people are being starved, and in the case of young and elderly, often to death. And then you have this fake aid thing. Okay, so we have this video. Then we have let's see. Let's hear what Netanyahu had to say about this.
Worked out a plan with our American friends to have controlled distribution sites, where an American company would distribute the food to Palestinian families. We tried the first one. We're going to put many today. There was some loss of control momentarily. Happily, we brought it back under control. We're going to put many more of these. And the idea is basically to take away the humanitarian looting as a tool of war of Hamas, to give it to the population, eventually to have a sterile zone in the south of Gaza where the entire population can move for its own protection.
Sterile.
So, what'd you say?
It's sterile. It's very interesting choice of words, right?
Yeah, seriously. So what is your response to both these, the horrific scenes that we're seeing? and also, of course, Netanyahu's presentation of what's happening.
Well, you know, I just to be very clear, when you have war, it always creates looting and black markets, and you're always going to have like a tiny fraction of society that's taking advantage of that, right? For whatever it is, you know, greed or survival, whatever it is. But like to say that that's such a problem that Israel has to like come in and you know, run things as if Israel isn't responsible for starvation. It's so like, you know, the gaslighting is unbelievable. And you know, I remember, so like I remember, because I know my World War II history pretty well, and you had the Nazi food minister, his name was Backe, and he literally created what is called the hunger plan. And they had like, they calculated like how many calories they could use to starve the Soviet prisoners of war and to make sure that, you know, German soldiers have their bellies full at their expense. And of course, the logic behind this was that, you know, Russian or Soviet soldiers are Slavs, and therefore, you know, they're also Bolsheviks, and they're like an inferior subhuman race, like completely, you know, racist, anti-Semitic, anti-Russian, Slavic, Nazi ideology. And like that, I couldn't help but think of that when I found out like a couple of years ago, for example, that Israel was doing the same thing in calculating how many calories it could put into Gaza. Like, so just
putting them on a diet.
Like, exactly, yeah. And so that was when there was no October 7, right? That's like, you know, a decade or two ago, when there was no, you know, declared sense of urgency like Netanyahu is claiming now. So you can just imagine when we see the genocide happening, what is going on there. And I think this is going to be one of those clips where people watch it in history class, and they're just like, what is wrong with everyone else? Like, this guy is off, but what was everyone else doing to stop him? Like, what, you know, the guy got on camera and said it, and no one did anything. And it's really horrific seeing those people, you know, in Gaza running and being humiliated like that.
Right.
I think that's also a part of it's intentional.
Part of me almost didn't want to play it because I didn't want to like feed into this idea of these kind of like brutes. I mean, it's very hard for me to even look at this footage. And then on top of it, it's like knowing that this is a man-made, like inflicted genocidal policy, and they're being humiliated, like you just said, Richard. And then it's like a hard thing because you also want to show what's happening because the world needs to see it.
Exactly.
But they're being so dehumanized. And I think it's also important that even now, I don't want to give any Biden people credit, but I do think it's important we have a video just to show you like how dishonest the claim is that this is something that's like being done, like the victim blaming, I would say, or even the claim that this is Hamas that's stealing it, right? That's a big claim. And Jonathan Cook pointed out, like, Israel has so much surveillance. If they had any documentation of this, they would be streaming it like all the time. But here actually is a clip of an ambassador, Battersfield, Ambassador David M. Satterfield. And he is someone who actually under Biden, he ran the humanitarian effort under Biden. And here's what he had to say about the claim that Hamas is responsible for stealing the aid.
Sorry, Katie, is this A5?
I just texted it to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, one more.
No, it's my fault. I didn't clarify that. Yeah. And again, these scenes are so horrific, and watching people defend this, you know, I tweeted this today, like really people will be asking people, like you just alluded to, Richard, like, what were you doing at this point? The way that they asked people about what they were doing during the Holocaust. And
yeah, exactly.
It's just so awful. And, you know, I keep thinking of this because a lot of people have made this point. I've heard it from a couple places, but Wallace Shawn said it during an interview that we did with him, which was, you know, at least the Nazis like hid their crimes. They tried to hide what they were doing. I mean, they documented them well because they're like that, but they weren't streaming them or making videos about them, right? And like you see Israelis are not only filming themselves doing this stuff, but they're actually doing it with like glee and celebrating and showing themselves wearing women's lingerie.
Yeah, and I grew up, went to school in Vienna, so many of my classmates, even if they weren't Austrian, they were French. They still had family killed in the Holocaust, taken to Theresienstadt, and it was a lot of collaboration in France when the Nazis arrived with the Vichy regime. So I know the history of the Holocaust very, very well, and I mean, just the technology back then, you didn't have mobile phones and the internet to even if you wanted to like show it off, to do it on that scale. And we do have that today. And it's just like, how can anyone claim that they didn't know? It's
right, exactly. Yeah, you can't.
And again, never again is supposed to apply to everyone.
Exactly.
And yeah, I just it's really degrading, like having people bombed like that. They probably got PTSD. They're running on like fumes at this point. Yeah.
There's no way that they can't. And actually, Gabor Mate tells this story about how he's worked with like people in Palestine, and particularly with this group of women who were tortured by Israeli police, or Israeli soldiers, excuse me. And he was talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And someone there, one of the Palestinian people who's working with, said, there's no post-traumatic stress disorder because it's not post. Like they're still living it, it's not even post yet because it's so ongoing. But let's take a look at what this Biden official said, former Biden official said.
That Hamas was stealing, profiting, and diverting the majority of the aid that was coming in. That is Israel's claim. How do you respond to that?
And by the way, this woman is someone who really pushed the mass rape hoax. And I didn't see her ever talk about the video of Israeli soldiers gang raping a Palestinian hostage. But anyway, okay, let's hear what he has to say. And again, this was someone who worked for Biden. This is not someone who worked for a president who was very critical of Israel. Okay.
Yep.
No such allegation or evidence in support of allegations like that were ever provided privately by informed Israeli security or political officials. It is a claim which, on the face of it, is not reflected in any of the experience that those involved in the humanitarian effort have seen. Did Hamas benefit politically from its presence at distribution sites to reinforce to the population of Gaza that they remained effective and in place? Certainly they did. Did Hamas take some assistance? Quite likely, but from the UN and INGO channels, which were highly accountable. Whatever aid was ultimately diverted in any fashion by Hamas was minimal compared to the aid that was received by the general population. Now, the same can't be said about aid that came in outside UN or international NGO channels. That's a different matter, and Israel understands that. But we're speaking now of the UN. The allegations that the majority, I've heard some claims, all of the assistance was seized by Hamas, that has never been made privately to officials involved in this process, nor demonstrated through evidence.
So again, this is someone who is not going to be very quick to criticize Israel, but this is just such an unbelievable claim that even someone like that is pushing back.
It is, and I just like to remind people that the UK is providing a lot of intelligence to the Israelis on a daily basis. There are these flights coming out of Cyprus that we know about, for example, and again, that's just what we know about. There's also human, human intelligence resources, and also satellites and all sorts of other, mediums through which intelligence is gathered that is being supplied to Israel by the UK, by the US, by their allies. And again, it begs the question: if this claim is true, why not just show that evidence? And I also don't understand the claim because, if let's say it's true that Hamas took the aid, well, how does that? I mean, why do you just condemn the civilians to starve? I mean, it's not their fault.
Right.
Is it? Right.
That's a really important thing to point out. Yes. Like, again, they are so used to controlling the narrative that they forget, like, that doesn't actually make it okay. Like, even if there were a Hamas person in this hospital, you're not allowed to do that. Like they
Right.
pretend that they're following rules of war and humanitarian law, and they are absolutely not. And all these like Israel defenders just parrot these talking points. I'm like, all you're doing is admitting to crimes that are war crimes, and you think because you have your heads up your asses that you're giving some legal justification. No, you're not allowed to bomb a hospital just because you claim there is someone in there. And you know what? Lots of people are in Hamas, and lots of people are not combatants, and they're rules of war, and this isn't even a war. This is a genocide, but at the very least, pretend to be observing these rules of war. But no, thank you for making that point, because sometimes it's like we're like so busy responding, debunking, that we forget to like center the important part, which is that who honestly gives a shit if that's the case? Like what we need to be pointing out is that they are just slaughtering people. And I wanted to actually show another clip. This is Prem Thakur, who was questioning a State Department spokeswoman. And let's hear what Prem has to say. And Prem has done a great job, by the way, asking, basically like never letting the State Department forget the name Hind Rajab. He brings her up frequently. And so here he is asking the State Department about the recent horrors that we've seen in Gaza.
Said just earlier today, the world has been shocked by what's happened in Gaza over the past few days. The silhouette of a little girl.
Well, I said it's been shocked over generations about what's
Sure.
been happening
Absolutely,
in Gaza,
absolutely.
and that Hamas certainly has refused to stop that violence. But go ahead.
So,
the violence of the girl who's being burned alive because her school was bombed. Okay.
But just in the past few days, we've seen the silhouette of a little girl trying to flee burning classrooms surrounding her, killing people around her. We've seen thousands of Palestinians starved by Israel's blockade, herded between fences as they try to get fed today. A doctor who saw 9 of her children killed by Israeli bombs. All the while, this administration, of course, as we've seen, has sought to deport students who protest this, including one student who wrote an op-ed against this kind of behavior. The administration came in telling Americans it would be more pro-peace, more anti-war than
This
the
is
previous.
beginning to sound like a soliloquy, sir. Do you have a question, please? Do you have a question, please?
I'm curious.
Yes, that's a very serious issue, and everyone has your question.
Yes.
So please ask it.
I wonder how you see this administration being more pro-peace or more anti-war than the previous administration, given these kinds of horrors that Americans are witnessing.
Yes, well, it is a dynamic where, as I also just mentioned a little bit ago, we did achieve a ceasefire, something which nobody thought would be possible after the heinousness of October 7th, the nature of what had occurred on that day, the fact that there has to be a new way, the president has stated, we have to have new ideas to make a difference so this stops and doesn't go from generation to generation. What we've got here is after, I don't know, what has it been, 3 months, a bit over 100 days of President Trump, managing to get, I think, every warring party, every hostile party against other people on this planet to a table to stop. Now, that's the simple part. Making things happen and making it last is another thing. Hamas, we did have a ceasefire. And then Hamas decided once again that that was just not going to do, and they continue to do what they do. That, first of all, again, regarding that particular issues over the last few days, we call on all parties to this conflict to take every feasible measure to mitigate civilian harm. We refer you to Israel for more information on its airstrikes. And we also know, as we all do, and this is one of the things that we've discovered time and time again, that Hamas uses hospitals and other humanitarian areas as human shields. This is why we continue to try to get a ceasefire done, despite the obstacles that Hamas constantly presents. It is apparently their hope that we would just give up and go away, or that the usual status quo would continue. But President Trump is not that person. He's a person who gets it done. After decades of conflict, I understand you're frustrated after maybe 3 months of it not being perfect yet.
Prem and all of us were just
I think we may have lost Richard.
there he's back. Okay, good. I was like, which government is taking him away from us now? Okay. It's just that we're perfectionists. That's our problem, Richard. We're perfectionists. I mean, where do you even start? There's so many lies in that one statement.
I just wanted to say, like, they made sure to get a real bulldog, like compared to Matt Miller. She's like straight. She's ready to like tear them to shreds before they even ask the question. It's honestly funny. I mean, I guess we have to laugh, otherwise we'd be crying, right?
Right.
But you know, it's like we refer you to Israel. What does that mean? Like, as if, you know, they have nothing to do with this. You're giving them the bombs. Like, when you sell bombs, you export weapons to other countries under arms export licenses. You have to follow your own laws and international law. Like this is a cornerstone of arms exports, right? You're supposed to pretend to give a crap that these weapons are not being used. And of course, they'll play games and stuff, but to say the sentence that, like, well, go and ask them. No, they're your bombs, literally your bombs, your jets. This is scandalous, honestly. And that was a good question, by the way. Like, you know, you're going to come in and pretend you're more pro-peace. I've always made this argument that Donald Trump is not more pro-peace. Like, in some ways, he's really been worse. I mean, if you look at his behavior during the first term that he had, you know, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, the American embassy, right? And then saying the Golan Heights in Syria are Israeli, and killing Soleimani and killing Abu Mahdi Mohandes, putting sanctions on Iran, leaving the nuclear deal. Like, he did so much for Israel. No, I don't think any US president has done more than Donald Trump. And that includes Joe Biden with the genocide, because the genocide is like, here's some weapons. It doesn't, you know, obviously it involves political calculation, but what political calculation has there been? Everyone's just been like, yay, keep killing Palestinians, you know? That's the Western position. Moving the embassy, you know, doing all these things I mentioned, these are really, like, you know, big steps. And they're one of the reasons Iran escalated and legally, by the way, escalated its nuclear program because of these actions. So, you know, Trump is not a pro-peace president. I think that's a really absurd argument that some people make, and he's demonstrated that. And also, what ceasefire? Like, I feel like I'm going insane every time they talk about this. What ceasefire? It lasted, like, you know, a few weeks, and then the Israelis started bombing again. Everyone knows this. And sorry, also, I'm just going on a rant.
No, keep going. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah.
And also the idea that Hamas broke the ceasefire.
Well, I'm not allowed to state facts lest I be prosecuted.
Okay, yeah,
so,
you're right.
You
Yeah,
know, I'll let you do it.
All right. Well, the claim that Hamas broke a ceasefire, and also the claim that they use human shields when the people who are documented as using human shields are the Israelis. Yes. Yep. Okay. Well, that was pretty infuriating and not surprising and on brand. And yes, I mean, Trump does not drain the swamp. He does not go after the deep state. He's good at rhetoric, at anti-war rhetoric. But as we've seen, he's funding and legitimizing and providing logistical support for the current genocide. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit, and then we're going to wrap because I know it's so late where you are. And thank you again so much, Richard, for joining us.
No, it's fine. This is normal streaming time.
Oh, good. Okay. So something that you cover, of course, is Syria. And you had a recent tweet that I wanted to take a look at. You wrote, another reason why Assad was ousted, Syria's foreign debt was just 15 million. That is nothing. Saudi Arabia and Qatar just paid it off, and now Syria is eligible for loans from the World Bank. Now watch the loan sharks plunge the country into massive debt. So can you talk about this and just offer also your assessment kind of where we are right now in Syria?
Yeah, Syria is really, like, dead. You know, I was saying towards the beginning of the show, you had this real social cohesion that I've never really seen anywhere else. I mean, even if in other places than the Levant, you might not find it all the time. I mean, if you look at Lebanon, it's very, very fractured as a society, you know, very, very sectarian. Syria wasn't like that at all, you know. And for all its faults under Assad, for all the bad things and corruption that existed, the secular part wasn't a bad thing. On the contrary, you know, you had, like, Christians were like 10% of the population. You know, I've never felt discriminated against, like, once, you know, not once. And as I told you, you had Jews, Christians, Muslims living side by side. And that's how it's always been, really, in that region. And, you know, one of the reasons they wanted to get rid of Assad is of course, because he supported, you know, Lebanon against Israel, supported Iran. And his father the same, by the way. And his father was also an ally of the Soviets. A lot of Syrian weaponry came from the Soviets. I mean, until Israel destroyed it a few months ago, you know, you still have, like, these S-200s from the Cold War that actually had a formidable air defense network over Syria. And, you know, people talk about it like it's a civil war. It wasn't a civil war. I mean, it was a civil war to the extent that the CIA made it into one. And I should remind people that the CIA spent over $1 billion. I mean, that's what we know from the New York Times. They spent $1 billion. So historically, that's the most expensive operation anywhere in history. And just ask yourself, like, you know, why would the CIA spend $1 million, never mind $1 billion, in another country unless they were serving their own interests or that of their allies? You know, you can't dumb that down to me like, oh, it's some kind of like, you know, freedom party for Syrians and stuff. And all of the things that I and others were warning about, that you're going to have Al-Qaeda coming to power, you're going to have more sectarianism, you're going to have Israel taking more land, imposing its you know, normalization and its will on the country. Every single one of these things has come true. And about the tweet with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, you know, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they had a split afterwards because Saudi Arabia is Wahhabi, you know, that's Wahhabism is their main ideology. Qatar are more Muslim Brotherhood. So, you know, these are very different branches of Sunni Islam. People like to talk about like, oh, it's Iran and Saudi Arabia, you know, Shias and Sunnis. It's like this stupid Western way of looking at things. Not at all like that. But the point is that before they had this split, they were all on board, you know, despite their differences with supporting regime change in Syria. And each one of them had their own goals. You know, Saudi Arabia for a long time has normalized ties with Israel under the table. If you look at the siege that the Yemenis put in place, how is Israel getting goods in? They couldn't get it through the sea anymore. So Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan basically built a land corridor for them. That's how they've been able to stay afloat these last months, these last years. And, you know, you look at Qatar, they've wanted to build a pipeline through Syria. And when you mention this during the last 10 years of the so-called civil war, you'd be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. And I swear to God, like, it's almost comical. 3 days after Assad is gone, 3 days, you can go look this up. You've got the Turkish energy minister bringing up this pipeline, right? So it's a project that's mainly by Qatar and by Turkey, because when you're building gas pipelines and oil pipelines, you want to keep them under 2,000 kilometers to make them viable economically. You know, otherwise the costs start going up like crazy. And you know, just geographically, you need to have it running through Syria. And Assad has always been like opposed to, you know, normalizing with Israel or kind of opening Syria up to Western corporations and banks. And that kind of debt, 15 million, is unbelievable. I mean, for any country, like 15 million is nothing. I mean, that's right. Some individuals have that kind of wealth. For a whole country to have $15 million in debt is a joke. Like they didn't need Saudi Arabia and Qatar to pay it off. The only reason they did that is because now Syria is going to take out all these loans from the World Bank, from the IMF. And of course, those loans are going to be, you know, where does that loaned money go to? It goes towards Saudi Arabia to build construction projects, right? And it goes to Qatar to build that pipeline and other projects. And of course, Israel, I'm assuming, is also going to be, you know, one of the benefactors of this, or beneficiaries rather, of this loan program, because they've gotten normalization not only on the table, but it's like a done deal. You know, in the first weeks after Assad fell, you had the entire Syrian military's weapons depots, jets, ships, every single thing was destroyed, like the navy gone. And like Assad is in Russia now, right? So these things belong to the Syrian people technically, right? To defend themselves. So why is Israel going and destroying them? That, you know, it's just purely out of spite. And Jolani, who declared himself the president, right? I thought we were going to have elections.
Moderate rebel.
Yeah, the moderate rebel, right?
Unquote, yeah.
I mean, this guy, he's in Damascus being bombed by Israel, basically. They dropped like 500 bombs on Syria, including many on Damascus. And he doesn't say a word. I mean, like, just out of self-respect, someone is dropping bombs on your city and you're calling yourself the president. You don't say a word? You don't say a thing? And when you did hear comments from this new regime or administration, they would be positive ones. They'd be like, yeah, well, Israel's just defending itself. I think it was the governor of Damascus, the new governor of Damascus, who said those words. He said, Israel they're just nervous. They're just defending themselves. You know, like the level of cowardice is truly unbelievable. Like, we don't have to go from Assad to that. You know, I'm sure we can find it in between. But obviously the CIA invested a lot of money. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of these countries invested a lot of money. You know, France, for example, their intelligence services were paying cement factories to keep running 24/7, even though that money was going to Al-Qaeda, right? Which they don't tell you. So everyone has had a massive economic interest in Syria, in addition to the political one, which is basically stop supporting the Palestinians and Lebanon, and stop supporting Iran. Because, you know, you look at the map, Syria is a bridge between Iran, Iraq, and then Lebanon and Palestine. So now that's gone, and they've been trying for 50 years to do that, and they've scored a massive victory. Like, if you ask me, Syria is the biggest Israeli victory in this genocide or this last year and a half. Biggest strategic victory. I mean, they dismantled PIJ. PIJ was headquartered in Damascus. That's one of the biggest groups in Gaza. You know, they arrested a lot of the leaders.
Islamic Jihad.
Exactly, yeah. And you know, they've basically told them disband. And this has been a long-term Israeli goal. Like, if I were an Israeli in Tel Aviv, a policymaker, I'd be popping champagne, you know, at this kind of news. Never mind the normalization and all the other, you know, gifts that come in this goodie bag. It's a massive strategic victory, far greater than what they did in Lebanon and in Palestine.
Wow. Well, anything else you want to make sure we talk about, or any final words? People are really excited that you're here, and this is an extra long stream because we're so excited to be talking to you, and you should definitely come back. But
thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that Asa got his devices back, because that ruling is good great for all of us.
The author of the weaponization of anti-Semitism, and also a contributor at Electronic Intifada, and someone who's written a lot about the Hannibal Directive.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's very good news. And you know, I think one of the things they took from me, and I haven't counted like how many devices they took, because you remember they grabbed my stuff in Heathrow, and then they also like took my stuff in Vienna. I think it's like well over 20,000 euros worth of equipment. It's like everything that I owned, everything that I bought for this job in the last 5 years. And I think that was intentional, because both in the UK and in Austria, they took stuff that like doesn't even have data on it, like Faraday bags, you know, or analog microphones, or like AirPods. I mean, yeah, there's some metadata on some things that you can gather, but I mean, an analog microphone, really, a bag, like what you know, a card reader. I think that was intentional to kind of like kneecap my work. Kind of like send a message like we do not want you able to like transfer files, even, you know, just like stop. And yeah, it's a massive like financial pain, and they also took my manuscript. So I was I'm still writing this book on cybersecurity. I was writing it for myself originally. I've been writing it for like 3 years, and you know, they've one thing that they've tried to do is get into my phones, and in the UK it's a criminal offense not to give your password under this law called REPA. And so the police, they made me sign a document saying that I will go home and write down the passwords for myself, so I can't say that I forgot them later. So they like corner you legally. But I told them afterwards, like, they kept asking for the passwords, and I said, I'm not giving them to you because as a journalist, I would compromise sources, confidential, you know, conversations, and you know, put people at risk, because there is that intelligence sharing agreement between the UK and Israel. So I'm not going to literally put people's lives at risk, and that could turn into its own case. So that's if they go and get a court order, that's like, you know, 2 to 5 years in prison automatically, and that's another reason why this whole case is like really really bad news for journalists. They've never pulled this kind of stuff before. They have sent, I think, a lawyer to jail because he wouldn't give his password over, which is, you know, of course, insane, because you have client privilege, client attorney privilege, which you're violating in that situation. But they're trying it now with journalists as well, and that's why it's a multi-pronged disaster, really. And at least the Austrian press covered what happened to me in Austria. The UK press haven't said a word so far, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Any idea?
I think, yeah, I thought that they're maybe just spineless, but there's another reason. Perhaps they were served with a D notice. So in England, a D notice is like it's like a gentleman's agreement. It's the government asking you politely to not talk about national security issues. Yeah, and Matt Kennard, he published the latest iteration of it, and they added counterterrorism to the scope of D notices about, I think, 2 months after they arrested me. So they've, I think that's why they haven't talked about me or anyone else for that matter who's been targeted in this crackdown, right? And I think that's scandalous that, you know, you're not legally obliged to follow it, but all these major outlets do it anyway because they want to maintain access and curry favor with the establishment, and I think that's really rank, honestly. That's state media, right?
Right. Wow. That's very disturbing.
It is.
Well, okay.
Sorry, just to interject, Richard. I just wanted to end with a little levity because you're bringing such important and unfortunately serious news, which I can't thank you enough for.
Sorry.
But earlier, recall you had mentioned, being likened to the likes of like Al Capone, and things like that. And I couldn't understand where people might get that impression because you're simply just reporting facts and truth. But I did a little bit of digging and I found a photo of Al Capone walking out of court in Chicago in 1931. And when I zoomed in here, I saw.
Oh, very good.
That's brilliant.
So you almost got away with it, Richard.
What can I say? I'm a gangster, like I admit it, I own it.
Wow.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. See, that's something you don't get in any other show.
No.
Brad's
that's a trained hand right there.
Yeah, exactly.
I do Photoshop as well. That's a trained hand.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Richard. And yeah, please do stay in touch and keep us updated on what's happening, and we will continue to cover this.
Thank you, Katie. Really just great show. And for the people listening, I was listening actually before I came on. That's how good it is. So I really love that conversation about apartheid in South Africa. And it was just wonderful.
I was thinking, I was like, oh man, I wish I should have them on together. All of you guys.
Yes,
together.
that would be great.
Yeah.
That would be great. But thank you so much.
You like nodding.
I hope we get to see each other. When is it? Like in a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, it is. June 13th to 15th. So yeah, let's definitely be in touch.
Richard, we are going to nerd out to audio stuff in several weeks.
I'm going to cancel Brad's flight now.
Oh man, I can't wait. It's going to be a blast. Thank you guys. Really.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Take care. Cheers.
Bye. That was a great show, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who stopped by. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to Phantom Esfanta for the clips. Thank you, Nate Newburn, for the research and notes. Thank you, Brad, of course, as always. Thank you, Andrew Calloway. Thank you to these super chatters. SJR gave us a super sticker. Thank you so much. Another super sticker from Abdullah Siraj. Thank you so much. A super sticker from Adam B. Vilma Thomas. What currency is this, Brad? Do you know?
My best guess without looking it up would be Australia, perhaps.
Okay, yeah. Or maybe Austria though, right? Because he is there. Like,
true.
Anyone know what the
I mean, I'm an American, so I'm ignorant. I'm sorry.
Right, yeah. Thanks for becoming a member, Judy. And Brian, another fabulous show, Katie. Thank you so much, Brian. Brian, the professor. All right. Well, is that any other announcements I need to make? I think we're gonna we're definitely not gonna patronize any of this unless it turns out that anything was said that's gonna get anyone in trouble.
Patronize?
I just made that up, yeah. But we will have Patreon for you shortly this week. We're definitely gonna have Patreon. I think it's gonna be Jim DiEugenio on Who Killed Martin Luther King. So that's really interesting. So please do become patrons if you're not already. Patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Someone said Austria, but someone's saying Australian. But it does make sense to me that would be in Austria. Oh, it's the euro in Austria? All right. Well, that would make sense. It would be really random that a bunch of Australians tuned in. I mean, I love Australia. I love the show Rape, by the way. Yeah.
Well, and random, like just popped into my head. We were talking about the show, the film Sinners earlier today.
Yeah.
And when I looked at the credits, a good amount of that was filmed in Australia. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm still gonna think that this is. I still think this is.
But regardless, Yeah, wherever.
Official currency of Australia. Oh, okay. It is Australia. Wow. It's
Oh.
Australia. Wow. Well, thank you to all the people in Australia watching. I do love that show, Rake. And I do like Jane Harmer. I've been reading her mysteries or listening to them. Anyway, thank you, everyone. And if it turns out it's not Australia, then I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Australia is racist. It's true.
Yeah, well,
racist.
so is America. So
I know. So is every country. I mean, no one's.
Everyone's got their problems. Yeah.
I know. And speaking of settler colonialism, another great documentary to watch is Sugar Cane. Sugar Cane. The documentary is nominated for an Oscar.
Wow.
All right. Thank you guys so much. And I will see you all next week. Bye, everyone.
Okay, calm down. You got limits, man. You got limits, man.